Hey gang, Dr. Kidgell here. I wanted to give you a heads up on what this video is about. It is it's the first part of an interview I did with Carlee from Nutrisense about something, a monitor that I wore, and they call it a continuous glucose monitor, and it is so awesome. It was better than I expected, and the interview was great. It was so good that we're gonna do another one. So the interview was a little long, so I've cut it in two. This is the first part. I hope you like it. Please make sure to share this. I'm telling you, life-changing. Can really, really help some people, and make sure you like the channel and the video. I would appreciate it. Y'all have an awesome day. Hi.
Hi.
So I'm going to introduce myself for those people that don't know who I am and are just finding this video randomly about Nutrisense or glucose monitoring or anything of that sort that we're going to cover today. My name is Dr. Kristen Kidgell. I'm from St. Petersburg, Florida. We are in the middle of we're in August of 2020, and most of us are working from home.
Nutrisense is kind of cool because we have people all over. So I actually always work from home. The pandemic didn't affect me in that way at all. It affected me in some other ways, but that at least stayed the same. So I was pretty used to working from home beforehand.
So let's jump right in, because I found out about this self blood glucose monitoring system from somebody else that was trying to learn more and increase their health. So I thought, okay, well, this is really important to educate other people, not just my patients, but being able to put this on social media. And then doing this interview with you, we get to dig right in. I would love for you to just briefly go through who you are, and then obviously your background, and maybe how you found Nutrisense or about the company itself.
Definitely. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. A little bit about me. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist and the lead nutritionist at Nutrisense. And so we're a company that uses, like you mentioned, continuous glucose monitoring to help optimize glucose metabolism, reverse preventable disease, and then just fine-tune users' diets based on their own biology. So it's really cool. And it's a very non-traditional role for dietitians in general. My health journey, my dietitian journey didn't start out in a non-traditional role. So I started out just in general outpatient counseling. So I was really working with people that had just come from their doctor with a diagnosis. They were either coming to me with, hey, I've just been diagnosed with diabetes, prediabetes, hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, you name it. I worked with them all. And what I found is that everyone would come to me very disgruntled, right? They were frustrated. They were disheartened. They didn't know there was anything wrong until they got that diagnosis. And so they felt defeated, but they were ready to make a change. And we would work together. We would find a program that would work for them. But what I started to wonder is, why am I the last referral, right? Why am I being sent these patients when they've already had this disease? And nutrition should be something that we're focusing on way earlier in the lifespan. So I started to just kind of research that, and I found this just disconnect between our health system and seeking prevention. So a lot of times these early signs of metabolic dysfunction are overlooked. And like I said, people don't know that they have an issue until that diagnosis arrives. So after that point, I thought, well, I want to do some research on my own and see what my glucose is looking like. Because in the research, you see that glucose metabolism is kind of one of the key drivers for all of these disease states, not just diabetes, but cardiovascular disease, hypertension. All these things kind of stem from glucose metabolism. So I started to monitor my own glucose, and I was using just a little finger prick device, which if you've ever used those long-term, they're not fun. I do not love that diabetics have to use those all the time. But I remember really well, my dad came up and we did what we called the blood sugar games, and we would finger prick our glucose, and we'd kind of have this competition of who could have the best fasting glucose, who can have the best postprandial glucose. And what I started to find is our numbers weren't optimal, right? My dad had higher fasting glucose despite a diagnosis or even a mention of that in his labs. I had sometimes some higher glucose values after eating, even though I was eating quote unquote healthy foods. So when I started to look into this a little bit more, I found that it wasn't just me. Like 88% of Americans are not metabolically healthy, and upwards of 93% of people are having these high glucose values without any diagnosis or even knowing to look for something that might be wrong. So it's really prevalent, and not everyone's going to want to prick their finger all the time. So I began looking for other ways, and enter continuous glucose monitors. As you know, you're wearing one right now, right? And they're just exactly
There.
they're pretty painless, maybe one prick, right? But then it's measuring your glucose 24/7 to capture all of those little nuances in your glucose metabolism without having that finger prick. So instead of, yeah.
Okay, so, you know, I've been in my profession for over 22 years, and, you know, I have a background in knowledge, which I have found out very quickly by joining on and wanting to do this little test, so to speak, on myself, that I really don't know that much, because you really have to be entrained. And unfortunately, the most people that know the most right now in the general public are the people that have it, not people like me that go every couple years and I get a functional blood test panel. And the last one I had a couple years ago, it said I was actually low, like hypoglycemic, but that's the fasting, you go in, shocker, right? But the more I'm learning, we'll get into in a second, but those fluctuations create the stress, and then everything overlaps. And this is really huge in prevention. I can tell you that I have personally seen in my practice super beautifully healthy physique people that are getting blood tests and coming back like pre-diabetic, all this stuff. So you said diabetes and pre-diabetic is prevalent. I think that's almost an understatement. It's, if you're eating an American diet on any level.
Oh yeah.
And I, you know, we can hit on my first week of results, but yeah, it's shocking because it's an eye opener, and I'm going to highly recommend that. But I also want to say really quick that I shot a separate selfie video last Friday when I put mine on, and I personally think it's hilarious, but it does show you somebody that has never, like, that's probably one of the things that's made me wait, is that the whole finger thing. I know that's been around for a long time. No, I am not interested in that. I don't know. It just wasn't my thing, but I saw, oh, this is easy. It isn't attractive, but it's small. Like, if it's winter, you're golden, right? But it doesn't even matter. I'm okay with people asking me. I think it's huge, and we'll just go on with that. Can you briefly tell me the history around Nutrisense itself as a company?
Yeah, definitely. So we're a company that kind of just focuses on that prevention. So we're trying to see those early signs of metabolic dysfunction before they might be recognized in a lab. So it was started by two guys and then my mentor, Kara, and we actually had our internship together, and we would talk about glucose all the time. We would test our glucose together all the time. I remember we were learning about continuous glucose monitors together. And so this was our dream kind of in fruition. And what we're doing now is assessing thousands of users' data to help see the early signs of metabolic dysfunction so that we can make those changes early on to prevent disease and help optimize health and lifespan. And so I think we're kind of unique in that we are seeing those early signs, but what also our company offers is support. So a lot of times, like you'd mentioned, like you are very, very knowledgeable about health and about metabolism and about glucose, but when you're seeing glucose data, it can be really hard not to feel lost in it. And that's where, you know, dietitians from Nutrisense, and this is what I do, I assess users' data and help them interpret that on their own so that they can see, okay, maybe the fasting glucose is where I need to work on, and these are some things I can actively do to prevent this in the future. Or, hey, I'm having like really high postprandial spikes to this food, what's going on here? So we're identifying those issues and helping people find the quote unquote perfect diet for their individual biology. And it's been really cool because I feel like that's the missing piece of the puzzle, is that personalized data that helps empower you to make those changes.
Huge. At this point, I can tell it's not necessarily a job. Like, this is a passion, and I can completely understand that. It's really prevention, and it's so needed right now. And America, not just America, obviously, but a lot of
Everywhere. It's everywhere. And I think sometimes we think, well, why should we monitor the glucose? I don't have diabetes. I'm sure you've got that comment with wearing your CGM. Like, are you diabetic? I remember going to Vegas and people asked me if I had type 1, just with wearing one. So
somebody, what is that? All these different things. And the easiest thing right now, because of being at work, is like, I'm a human guinea pig right now. I'm testing out this particular, I'm trying to understand it more. But when you watch my the video of me going through the steps of putting it on and the why, I kind of rolled my eyes and I'm like, I think I don't really have a blood glucose issue. And that was, so now I'm like curious, could I be? I'm watching the spikes, I'm watching the dips, and then we'll get into that, because that's a really good segue into the question I have about why should healthy people even care about putting one of these monitors on for, a month or
yeah.
2 weeks, or we'll go through that whole part in a second though.
Yeah, definitely. And I fully believe that everyone, regardless of your health status or how you feel, should wear a CGM at least once in their lifetime so that they can kind of see what's going on. But what I find is that once you wear it once, you're going to want to wear it maybe periodically throughout the rest of your life just to make sure things are going okay. That data can be addictive, right? But we like to think of glucose as our other vital sign. So we measure, blood pressure, we measure our weight, we measure our waist circumference, all those different things, but we're really missing that opportunity to measure glucose, which is a window into our metabolism. It shows us how our metabolism is working. And like I mentioned, it can give us those little yellow flags that maybe some things are off, or maybe we need to tweak some things before they become actual issues. So if you think of your body like a car, glucose is fuel, right? So it's like gas in your car. And we need a certain level of fuel to keep our body working well. And our body works really, really hard to keep glucose in this really stable range for homeostasis. And you'll notice from looking at the app, we're trying to keep it kind of in that range of like 70 to 140, 70 to 120. There's a little bit of debate about that tolerable upper limit, but ideally we're kind of in that range. And our body, like I mentioned, is working really hard to keep glucose within that range. So when it goes a little bit too high or a little bit too low, our body has to work extra hard to keep it and kind of get it back into that ideal range. So if you're not measuring this, you don't know. You don't know if you're having those higher glucose excursions. You don't know where you're at. So it's all guesswork. And in the short term with high glucose, you might not feel it, but a lot of people do. And usually subjective feelings you might feel are maybe some mood issues. You might have energy issues and feel just kind of fatigued throughout your day. You might have greater risk for anxiety, more cravings, poorly regulated hunger cues. All those different things can just be linked to high glucose or really big fluctuations in glucose. Again, if you're not monitoring, you don't know. But then long-term health, right? So those high glucose excursions above that level can lead to oxidative damage, inflammation, ultimately insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction. And those don't happen right away. They don't happen from one single spike. Everyone spikes on occasion, but over time, repeated exposure at that high glucose level can increase your risk of all of those things.
So watching myself and watching my app and trying to study that more and seeing the spikes, which can be exercise, which is really important. So we'll get into why exercise is really important and why it spikes it on the chart, but the different foods. But one of the things I find interesting, and I really...
Are you there?
Yeah, we froze up for a second. I want to know specifically how not having good control-ish, if you don't know, how it can affect women in particular, because I saw that carbs affect women differently, and because of our hormone issues and being in my upper 40s, I think I'm watching myself and all of my friends were going through all these different hormone stages. So yeah, what is the information behind that?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. And in general, I think women sometimes struggle a little bit more with glucose metabolism, more than men, just because of our hormonal differences. So if you think about women versus men, there are two main differences that can kind of influence our glucose metabolism. the first one, and this is probably not a surprise, but men have a lot more muscle mass than women. And when we think about glucose, our muscle, our skeletal muscle is a huge sink for glucose. So the more muscle mass we have, the more storage space we have for muscle or for glucose. And so all of that storage space means that men typically can respond better to carbohydrates because, again, they have more storage for that glucose coming in from those carbohydrates. And they also have just better insulin sensitivity because insulin sensitivity is closely linked to how much muscle we have.
Okay.
So they have more storage space. They're responding better to carbohydrates. So, I mean, if you think about the same diet being prescribed to men versus women, doesn't always work out.
No, especially when like a couple starts working out together and then the guy's like dropping all the weight really quickly and the woman's like, what? So that just makes me fall in love with my B3 bands like even more. So
oh yeah.
That makes me so happy. So there's a whole nother video about B3 bands and the growth hormone effect. I mean, not just the hormonal effect, but the muscle building effect. And
oh my gosh.
So
important for women, right? Like I think women sometimes are so scared to strength train or to do resistance training, but we're the ones that need to build that muscle mass a little bit more.
And the bands make it safer, easier, even with injuries. I mean, I've got my share of injuries just to. So what does the glucose do with the liver and the insulin resistance? There's something that happens with the liver, the stress when you're stressing your glucose.
Okay, yeah. So when you have stress in general, is that kind of what you're referring to? When you have
that's adrenals and cortisol too, though. So we've got different organs. I mean, they're all playing together. They're all intertwined.
100%. And a lot of times, I think another thing with women is that they are more sensitive to stress. We tend to ruminate a little bit more. We tend to struggle with cortisol a little bit more. And the one thing that cortisol does, in accordance to glucose, is that it kind of works against us when stress is chronic. So an increase in cortisol in our system, so our stress hormone, is going to signal the liver to produce and release more glucose. So we're releasing our stored glucose from the liver, we're producing more glucose, but also that cortisol is going to stimulate our insulin sensitivity to decrease. So it's a double whammy, right? We have more glucose in our system, but we're unable to use it as efficiently. And if you think about an actual stressor, if we're being chased and running for our life, that's good because we have more fuel in our system to fuel our movement from that stressor. But in today's modern society, we've got COVID-19, we've got everything going on. We can have this chronic stressor, and that can lead to really high glucose levels all the time. And that can actually work really hard against us.
And so that made me just totally think about, so I'm like going through different scenarios, friends, patients, whatever, neighbors, where in general, maybe it's just because I'm a female, you know, and things of that sort, but we tend to turn to wine in the evenings. And most of the wine has added sugar, and that isn't necessarily true for every company putting wine out, which is why I'm so thankful to have been introduced to the Dry Farms wine, which is they specifically do not allow or sell wine that has any sugar added, and that doesn't spike my blood sugar. And I was
that was awesome.
Red wine. But that is the general thing, is that the women, they're stressed, they get off work, they drink wine, and then they're in this cycle of now we're affecting our adrenals and our liver and our blood glucose. And then now I can see how you explain it, how this leads to serious health issues. And I mean, people are just doing it to relax, but this is much bigger implications quickly. I feel like not just like, oh yeah, in 10 years and I'll cut back, but this could be within 3, 4, 5 months.
Oh man. Yeah. And I see alcohol, it can kind of have a confusing effect as well, because in the moment of drinking alcohol, what we often see, especially with a low sugar wine or even a regular wine, we can see this reduction in glucose from that alcohol. So we can see that and go, oh, shoot, this is something I'm going to add in more often. And that's because our body's prioritizing breaking down that alcohol instead of our normal homeostatic functions. But what we often see is that fasting glucose will be higher that night and the day before or the day after. So it's a delayed effect with alcohol. And this doesn't happen all the time. If you're consuming moderate amounts of alcohol, I am not concerned. But if this is something that you're relying on to relax, then it can become that issue where you have that chronically higher fasting glucose.
So that makes me think then, and then let me know if this correlation is correct, because the conversation that goes, you drink too much in the evening, you sleep like crap. And then that's the blood glucose. And so I've had this thing where if I have patients that they don't drink or anything, but they keep finding themselves waking up at like 2-3, I had learned to have them take maybe a handful of peanuts or almonds or cashews and get some protein in before brushing their teeth and going to bed. How does that level the blood sugar? Because that seems to be a really easy fix, doing that little bit of fats and proteins. Maybe they're eating early, and that sleep. How is this blood glucose affecting sleep? Because so many people do not sleep well, interrupted or insufficient, right?
Oh my God.
Things.
Huge. And they both, so sleep and glucose kind of have this bidirectional relationship. You had mentioned, if your glucose is high, you're going to have poor sleep. Like if you've eaten a huge carbohydrate meal before bed, you will probably have a reduction in REM sleep. You will probably have disrupted sleep or just lower quality sleep. And then it goes the other way too. So if you have poor sleep, that can reduce your insulin sensitivity. And that can happen, like you mentioned, with fragmented sleep. So if you're sleeping 8 hours, but you're waking up every 2 hours and it's just not restful sleep,
that kid is waking you up, or a dog. I mean, it's like not just your own body, right?
Other factors are definitely huge there. Yeah. And this can reduce your deep sleep and increase your glucose values up to 25% the next day.
25%.
25%. And there's been studies that show that sleep insufficiency, so like 4 hours of sleep, which I feel like a lot of women, maybe new moms, or maybe they're just taking care of so many different roles in their lifestyle, sleep's the first thing to go, right? And
Totally.
what can happen is when you're sleeping in adequate amounts, that can reduce your insulin sensitivity by up to 24%. So you're not sleeping well, your insulin sensitivity is lower, you have higher glucose values, and it can be this just kind of vicious cycle that's hard to get out of.
So when does the pancreas go, had enough?
Well, hopefully never. Hopefully it's always going to keep going. But that's why this is so important. If we can see these small changes and identify, well, okay, these are the 3 things that I'm really struggling with. Let's start to make some steps to improve those. We can preserve that beta cell function in the pancreas before we ever have anything diagnosed wrong.
We're going to attach a bunch of links, information, ways to contact your company, anybody that wants to contact me. We'll put it all in the notes attached to the video for sure, because this is much bigger than I thought it was before I started, to be 100% honest.